So it is December 2024, I'm about to go into 2025, and I thought I'd do another Davinci Resolve tutorial on my color grading process because quite a lot of things have changed since my last one, so let's just get into it. Okay, so let's start off with what devices I'm using. So I've got my MacBook Air 15-inch M3, 512GB, just the baseline for everything else, 8GB of memory and CPU all baseline. And then I've got my Espresso 15, so 15 inches, non-touch, non-pro, it's just kind of the base version with the plus stand so I can have it above my computer. And then I've just bought Davinci Resolve Studio, but the only things that I use at a studio in this is false colors and Filmlet Creator, but both of them I have free versions that work similarly. So I always start off with my base project and then I duplicate that and change the duplicated version because I always want to have my base, which has my timeline grade, my LUTs and my node tree all set up, so I don't have to set it up new every time. So I'm just going to copy and click off and paste. There you go. Rename, let's call it tutorial, open this up. I'm going to open my cut or my edit page. I'm going to delete these. These are for, I use them for calibrating different settings when I'm in the base project and also making sure that my export settings are right, so I can check that my monitors are calibrated right. That's all a bit kind of confusing, you don't really need to know why they're there, but this is really useful for checking exposure and checking your false colors are all correct and stuff, and this is good for checking the color accuracy of monitors. So I'll just delete those. I'll also delete them from the media bin because I don't want to import them, and then I'm just going to drag in one clip into my media bin and then into my timeline and just put it there, and I'll just have it here. I'll open up my color page, and so you'll see I already have two LUTs here, and if you go into my timeline I already have some nodes set up already, and my CST out is there. CST in isn't yet because I haven't applied anything yet, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply my C-Log3 LUT. If I was using Rec 79 I'd apply that, and if I was using S-Log3 or anything like that, you just have to change this CST in, and then I'd create a new LUT that would be called S-Log3, let's say. And then what I've got just above this screen is, if you go into Workspace, Video Clean Feed, this is the monitor, and it basically just always shows me a completely clean version of the video that I'm color grading above, so I can see in a big way the effects that I'm having. You got to make sure to calibrate it correctly and make sure it's in the right color space and stuff, and the right brightness and contrast, and you can kind of do that by pulling up the same clip at the bottom or the top and checking the differences. Right now it's not perfect just because if I was to have it like this, they're pretty similar. So let me just show you my CST in. I'm taking Cinema Gamma log 3 into Wide Gamma Intermediate, and then my CST out is Wide Gamma Intermediate into Rec 79, Rec 79A. So this has changed since my last video. I think they used to both be Rec 79A, but now it's 79, 79A, and then in the Deliver panel, in Advanced Settings, it's the same Rec 79, Rec 79A. And then in my timeline settings, it's YRGB color managed SDR Rec 79. So I had to go through and test them all out because no one online knows what it is, because it just changes based off of Apple and Blackmagic's decisions. So I'll just quickly go through this node tree again, just to kind of explain everything. Exposure, I use HDR, global wheels. Keep it pretty simple. I can use my waveform if I want to match up clips, but then also I can use my false colors to make sure that his skin tone is correct. So I'd have it, you want the highlights of his skin to be in this pink area, which is one stop above middle grey. So I calibrated this, mainly changing the pre-processing, black level, white level and gamma, and basically the way that I did it was I pulled up that grey chart that I had before and I changed these so that middle grey was green, which is middle grey, and then black is that kind of purple, and white is the red, because I added it before my CST, so it's still working in Davinci Wide Gamma. If I added it after, it'd be slightly different. yeah, default it doesn't work, and this is in Creative too, but an exposure guide, which helps because you have this here. Anyway, that's setting up my false colors. If you don't have the studio version, I've actually deleted it, but you can make your own by using the qualifier to basically select a certain level of exposure and then using the curves to make that level of exposure a complete color, so like green for example, which is what I used to do, but now that I have real false colors, it's a lot better, and it also matches up with my camera monitor, like the middle gray, one stop over middle gray, so I know when I put it in it's the exact same. So if I go back into my clip, that's how I do my exposure, balance, I open up vector scope and try and make it neutral. So I probably pull this clip out a bit here, but this is quite a saturated clip, so it's a bit difficult to do. Also a little hack, if you want to have two of these at once, but your screen's not big enough, you can do this and then drag it down to here. So you can see you have two. The only problem I've found is that it does get a bit in the way. Because I have a monitor up top, I can put it in here, but then it gets in the way if I'm using Windows and stuff. Or I can put it down here and kind of cut it off a bit, but then it's cut off a bit. And I can still adjust these. And also you have this at the top, which is slightly annoying. So anyway, I'm going to keep it as normal for now. Balance is balancing it. Subtractive saturation is another new node. It's a film thing that is also in the film look, but I created it myself before, so you don't need to pay for this subtractive saturation, but you do for the film look. So if I right click, the first thing you got to do is change the color space to HSV, and then you got to deselect channel 1 and 3, and then if you go into your primary color wheels and change your gamma, that's subtractive saturation, which is cool to have for free, and it basically, instead of increasing the exposure, I mean I don't know a lot about it, but it's a much nicer way to saturate things, and it doesn't change the exposure. But for this clip, I'll probably just keep it like that. You don't want to do it too much, and you can sometimes see in the vector scope it starts to break down a little bit. For my contrast node, it really depends on kind of the whole scene that I'm shooting. I won't change this shot to shot, these couple of different ways that I do it, but I will change it like for the entire project, let's say. So one way is just using curves. I tend to select just Luma because I don't like it compressing the colors and changing the saturation. I then have two different ways of doing it in the curves. One is by turning on editable splines, clicking on the top, the two things that are already made, and changing the spline so that it creates an S-curve like that. And then you can kind of extend it out, shorten it, depending on what you want. Another way that I do it is by, you can keep editable splines on or off, but I tend to keep them off for this way, add default anchors. Because I'm working in log, the Luma is kind of compressed down to this bottom range because there's not information here, because it's not the full picture. So I remove a couple of these, and then, I mean I tend to do S-curves because that's just what's standard. But I'll S-curve that, and I'll try and get the middle of it to be the middle of the Luma. And you can see this, which is presumably this sand here, is right in the middle. Turn that off and on and see what you like. I mean, me personally for this clip, I'm not going to add any contrast. The final way, or the final two ways, there's another two ways I do it. One is with my HDR, and the other is with my primaries. This is something you need to kind of try it yourself. But the HDR, it doesn't change the saturation at all, which can be quite nice because it seems to make it a bit sharper too, and just cleaner shadows. Whereas the primaries, this contrast here, you see it really, look how orange the image gets, like in these parts here, which isn't great. You can see how saturated it gets in the vector scope. So I'll use them in different ways. You can see the vector scope doesn't change. So that really depends on what you're looking for. Sometimes I'll use a mixture of both HDR and primaries, and then sometimes I'll just use the curve, and then I'll also sometimes use the curve with them linked. So I guess you can kind of see just using Y is like using the HDR contrast, and linking them all together is the same as using the primaries. So as long as you know what the difference is, you can really use that to your advantage. Moving on to these are pretty self-explanatory. I I mean, I have them labelled as this, but you don't have to have them labelled as this. Also, this one's only here so that the lines can all make sense a bit easier, which is why it's locked. Skin exposure, I usually just use this to select skin. I'm not going to in this because he's a bit too far away. Windows, I just use windows. For this bottom one, what I normally like to do is something like this. Again, it's not really needed in this clip because there's a lot of like leading lines and stuff which you don't need to emphasize, but I'll do it anyway. What I normally do, so I'll create this window, I'll then go into my HDR wheels, increase exposure, saturation, sharpness a little bit, maybe a little bit of contrast, rotate my hues around and make it a bit warmer and more pink, I guess. And then I've changed my keyboard binding so that when I press O, it creates an outside node. But you can also just do this by creating a serial node and just linking in the matte and then going in here and then inverting it. So you can see in the like node kind of thumbnail here that you're actually selecting the outside in this and the inside in this. So what I'm going to do is go into HDR and kind of do the opposite of what I've just done. Decrease exposure. I like in this node to decrease the sharpness a lot, and looking at my monitor I'll kind of go up to a certain point that I'm happy with. And then maybe decrease the contrast a bit, and then if that's making it too bright, generally when you decrease the contrast, because the pivot will be quite high, you want to decrease the exposure a bit more too. Rotate hue around and make it a bit cooler and more green. And then if you select both the nodes, you can see it kind of brings the emphasis in the middle. Quite a lot of the time I'll not like increasing the exposure or the contrast, just because I will have done the exposure for the skin like correctly. So changing it in these nodes will then kind of put it off a bit. So basically the structure of this node tree, you've got 3 different sections. This one is to kind of get the clip like balanced to a baseline level without any kind of look on it. So you want the vector scope to be around the middle and the waveform to be pretty neutral. You can, I wouldn't say like crush the blacks or bloom out the highlights in these, but keep it all kind of pretty normal. And these are what you change clip to clip. And then these nodes are also for a clip to clip basis, and they're just your windows, but you can also copy them over from the other one and just change the windows based on each clip, like move them around a bit if you need to. And then these nodes are for the entire scene. So I tend to, in the first clip of the scene, I'll hone them down and then I'll create a still from that, and then I won't ever change these. For this, I just do another skin adjustment for the entire scene if I want the skins in the scenes to be a bit lower saturation. Let's say curves. I generally don't use this curve, but I'll use some of these if I want the shadows to be not as saturated. I'll do something like that, or you know, change, I don't know, decrease the exposure of the blues or something to get a filmic depth. Exposure, if I want the whole exposure of the scene to be a bit lower, then kind of baseline, crush the blacks a bit. Balance, I tend to just make it a lot warmer. If I just open up my vector scope along the skin line, let's say. I mean, I'm not properly color grading this clip. And then highlights, something I like to do, and this is with the free version too. I'm just going to turn on the mask mode and then bring my luminance up. That you can create halation from this, which on this clip isn't really needed or possible, but so I know that I'm just selecting this bit, go into my HDR, decrease the exposure bit, make it a bit yellow. Oh, well, to make the halation, you need to go into 2, grow, and then morph radius, just increase it a bit, and you can see you have this kind of fringe around here, which is what we're going to be affecting. And then by making it more yellow, and well, you can also increase the exposure if you want, or decrease. I tend to like the look of when it's decreased, and then also decrease the sharpness. You can't see it much on this clip, but it just affects those highlights and gives you a bit of a nicer roll off. So yeah, that's a bit of an explanation of the clip node tree. So you've got CSTN, clip nodes, power windows, and then scene nodes. I just want to jump in and show you how to match 2 clips, match their exposure and their balances, and make sure everything looks pretty much the same. So I'm just going to grab another clip and pull it into the edit panel just after this clip, open up color, and obviously this doesn't have any look on it, but the first thing that you want to do, as I explained before, these nodes looks, and then these ones are the windows. These basically, you don't really want them on when you're balancing the clips because they'll change what you think is balanced and they'll change the waveform in the vector scope. So I'm going to turn them off on this original clip that we've already color graded. I'm going to turn them off and I'm just going to keep on these four, and then I'm going to grab a still, go to the other clip and apply that still, and then turn on a split screen, and you'll see that we have the two kind of baseline clips for both. But you can see that the clip on the left is very different, the exposure is different, and if we're to open up the vector scope, that'll also be different. You can see it changing as we drag it across. So we'll start off with the exposure. You can see here, I mean, this is pretty simple. You can just use a split screen and use one thing that's in common, like this sand here, and change it like that until it's pretty much the same. These clips are taken at different times, so they're going to look slightly different, but you can see that exposure is pretty similar now in that waveform at the bottom. And then I'm going to open up the vector scope, and there's a little trick that I like to use, which is change this side swipe, which is just normal, to this, which will kind of give you just little like windows into what it looks like. And it basically makes changing the balance a lot easier, because instead of just having one half of a clip where one half might be like really yellow and the other might be really blue, it kind of lets you see everything. And you can use either one, but I prefer to use this. It's working better now. And then through moving the balance in the vector scope, you can see that you have two different things that are basically the same shape, and you essentially just need to match them up. It's just like a game of matching them up and making sure that they're pretty much the same, like that. And then you turn that off and you can see that you've changed that a bit. And like this grade isn't a good grade, I'm just kind of showing you the premise of how to do it. And then the subtractive saturation will be the same on both clips. Now if you bring this in, they're pretty similar. I mean, they're a bit different, but if I was to spend more time on it, they'd be a bit similar. And then you can go through and turn these all on. And then if I turn on these nodes for this one too, they're pretty much the exact same. That's actually pretty good. If you then go into timeline, you've got all of these which are turned off, and you want to keep them turned off until you've individually color graded all the clips, and then just before you're about to export, you can look at these. So these are the ones that I set up myself in the free version. You got just a vignette which doesn't have much of an effect. You can see it a bit around here. It decreases the sharpness a bit and the exposure slightly, but I've got it on a pretty low setting, like it's only minus 0.8 stops of light. Blur, this one's quite an interesting one. You can see this orange and sometimes green, although I can't find it in this clip. Yeah, just here, this green fringe around, which is essentially fake chromatic aberration. How I did that was I unlinked this radius with this button here and then changed them so that there's green on the left, and then I just decreased it a bit because I didn't want it to be that strong. That's quite a nice trick that I use. Sometimes I use it for curves too. If I want the curves to be easily edited, I'll like bring them up big here, make big effects like this and like this, and then if it's too much on the actual image, I'll go to this and I'll just decrease the key output to make it less like punchy, I would say. And then this node at the bottom is just making sure that the shadows aren't too saturated, because that's where you get quite a lot of noise, and bringing down the saturation in that just helps with a bit of that look. And you can increase it, there's not much on it now. It's kind of just like to make sure if there are accidentally any clips that have really low exposure and the shadows are really crushed, it's just to make sure there isn't much color in there. Split toning, this is another thing that I'm not going to go too deep into, but is something that kind of needs to be delved into. I'll just explain it really quickly. Basically, it's a film thing, and you want warmer highlights and cooler shadows, and then also a bit of an S-curve. So if I select my Y, it actually doesn't help, but this is a slight S-curve here, here, and here. Red is increased in the highlights. There are kind of two like keyframes, I guess, I don't know what they're called. here to make sure that within this range there's no color change, and then in the shadows there's less red. Green is pretty much the same throughout. I think it's a bit higher in the shadows and a bit lower in the highlights, and then blue much lower in the highlights and then a bit higher in the shadows. So then to explain this bit in the middle, what I basically did was I got my middle grey chart, and this section here goes from like a stop below to a stop above middle grey, which is where you want your skin to be. So the whole idea of this is that it doesn't affect the skin, which is in here, but the scene around it, so the highlights and the shadows around it will be affected, and then you've also got a bit of a lift here in your Y. I'm going to turn these off, because if you don't want to do any of that and you want to pay instead, you can just use your film look. Now this, I haven't done a lot of work on it, and it's not really something you need to do because it gives you all the things here, but I tend to leave the color settings, just change the split tone. It literally just has a slider that you can do, and the pivot, that's something that you should look at, and open up your waveform and check where your skin tones are, and then make the pivot at where the skin tones are, because you don't want them to change. Vignette, I mean, all of this stuff, it's pretty self-explanatory and easy to learn, so I'm not going to go through them. I do like a bit of grain though, so I'll add in a tiny bit, but I make it very, very fine. So you can barely tell, but you can see it in the sky a little bit there. So after this film look, you've got your false colours, which I've just raised above because I know that I don't want to have them on for my export, and then you got your CST out, which takes you from wide gamut, intermediate to 7979A, which I've already explained. And then if you go into your deliver, this is kind of a whole section in itself. You need to change this for each time you want to export. Video, MP4, H.265, because you want it to be that codec HEVC as opposed to H.264, just because it's smaller file sizes, and unless you've got an old computer, that's really what you should be using. Render at source resolution, that's important, you've got to keep that checked. If you've got a file that's bigger than 2180 by 3840, like 4K, standard 4K, and you don't have the paid version, it'll export with black bars around the outside because you can't export a file that high, but there's not really much you can do about it, and you just have to deal with the lower resolution. I leave export alpha automatic. This is something that you got to think about. So if you want to make more color changes after you've exported it, like just slight exposure things, which I sometimes do when I'm in Final Cut Pro, which is what I edit in, I want to keep 422, which just allows me to have a bit more color information. So if I want to increase or decrease the exposure, which is kind of all I do, or just make it a bit warmer, there's a bit more color information there. But if you don't, then do main 10, it's still 10-bit, but it just doesn't have as much color information, which means that it's a bit more of a compressed file and a bit smaller. Multipass encode, I always leave that on to make it a bit sharper and higher quality, but you can turn that off if you want it to be faster render, because it doubles the rendering speed. Automatic keyframes, turn off frame reordering. I've had some issues where it has like black frames, which mess it all up. 709, 709A, same as project. I kind of leave all of these. You can just copy those if you want subtitles. I don't have any subtitles. Audio, AAC, constant bitrate, 320. Same as source. This is important actually. Same as source is important, otherwise Final Cut won't relink the files. 1 track per channel. Source name, don't use unique file names. You can kind of leave, use all of this. Render speed maximum. And then just, change the location. This should be all dialed in your base, so you don't need to change any of these apart from this main 1042, which changes based on what you want. Add to render queue, and just render that out. So I'm going to show you my Final Cut Pro timeline now, which is where I kind of do all my editing, although I am thinking of switching over to Davinci, as everyone is. So I just created this new library called delete, so I'm going to delete it. And I'm going to import my log clips from my camera, none of my Davinci Resolve clips. And the reason why is because I want to be able to edit even if I haven't color graded them yet, because I sometimes color grade before, after, like in the middle, whatever I think. So I'm going to click on my log clips, my log clip folder, import them all. So I'm going to have to create a new project. Just 4K normal project. And I'm just going to import a few clips. And I can edit them and chop them up a bit and rearrange them, whatever, change the audio and stuff. just to create a little timeline. And then once I've color graded them all and everything's like looking good on Davinci Resolve's end, I can then select all my clips in up here, go into File, Relink Files, Original Media, Locate All, find the Davinci Resolve folder that I exported the color grade into, and then click Choose. If it says here that it can't find the files and it's like 0 out of 63, then a few things might have gone wrong. So the file name might be different, the audio tracks might be different, or the length might be different because you like edited it in Davinci Resolve. But if you've done everything that I've done, it should be fine. And if not, then you got to figure that out. Click Choose. This should happen, and there should be none left in here. There might be some left in here that weren't able to relink. Got to figure that out. Relink files, and then you'll see in the timeline they're all color graded. So that's kind of how I bring them in, and all the audio stuff is the same, and the same high quality. Yeah, so that's the Davinci Resolve to Final Cut workflow. I think that's all.